Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox recording here to help you out with the 3 key areas where you're probably going wrong with mid-range. In this video, I'll show you where you're probably going wrong and how to easily fix it. Let's dive into it. All right, so after running this YouTube channel for years, people send me their mixes all the time, and I would say that there are 3 primary areas where people almost always, when starting out with mixing and production, where they go wrong with mid-range. And the good news is that it's so easy to fix that you won't even believe it. And I'm gonna show you how to fix these 3 key areas right in this video, straight and to the point. Key area number 1 where you're probably going wrong with mid-range, I hear this all the time, is vocals. So right here, I have a session pulled up. I'm gonna play the track back and I want you to pay close attention to the lead vocal. Let's check it out. Time takes us all. Will you waste it all? My time will come. Tremble at the... So if you were paying close attention, you probably noticed that the vocal sounds kind of cloudy. It sounds professional, and that's because the rest of the mix is pretty well dialed in, but it sounds almost like he's underwater. Let's take a look at the EQ here. So if you notice, rolling off all frequencies below 130 hertz, which is great because any of those low frequencies on a vocal we're not really gonna need, but I have a little bit of lower mid build up here because I'm actually boosting a little bit of lower mid, and people tend to do this for some reason. They see pro mixers online boosting frequencies all over the place, and then they do the same, and often it doesn't sound that great. For me personally, I'm all about getting rid of frequencies that you don't need, specifically with a vocal track. Now this vocal was recorded in a budget project studio, so I didn't use any processing on the way in. It's just my Shure SM57 plugged directly into my USB interface. So it's gonna need a little bit of carving out. Let me play the track back in context, and I'm gonna adjust the mid-range and explain to you what I was listening for and what I ultimately did. Super easy. Time takes us all. Will you waste it all? My time will come. Instantaneously, it sounds like a blanket has been lifted off of the vocal track. And all I did, super easy, you can do this with any stock EQ plugin, is I've gone in there with a low shelf EQ and reduced all frequencies below around 500 hertz because most of that buildup is just gonna make the vocal sound cloudy. And I've also gone in there and cut around 800 hertz. I've found that on most home recorded vocal tracks that aren't processed on the way in, there's a buildup of that upper lower mid and lower mid that you just don't need. And the solution is so simple. That weird cloudy vocal sound that you just heard, I hear in so many home recorded tracks that it's not funny. I would go as far as to say maybe 75 to 80% of the tracks that people send me have the vocal sound that you just heard. And look how easy it was to fix. Don't be afraid of reducing lower mid frequencies in your home recorded vocal tracks, especially when using a dynamic microphone. I also just want to shout out my friends in Poeta. This is the track that you are listening to. It's a track that's soon to be released in the near future. I finished producing this track earlier this year, and if you're interested in checking out more of Poeta's music, there's a link below in this video's description. They're a great band. I highly recommend listening to their music. Okay, so that was number 1, easy fix, vocals, super straightforward. Let's move on to problem area number 2 that most people tend to have when producing tracks out of their home studio, and that is snare drum. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm actually just gonna mute the vocals so we could focus primarily on the music. Now I'm gonna play the track back once more, and I want you to focus in super carefully on the snare drum sound. Check it out. So the snare sounds cool, it's got a nice pop to it, but it's very boxy and weird sounding and dark sounding. Much like with vocals, this tends to be the case when people record drums at home because they're scared of over EQing their tracks. And don't be scared of over EQing your tracks. Pros go crazy with EQ if need be. And with snare drum, much like with vocals, I find that people are just too scared to manipulate the mid-range. So let's fix the snare drum. did is cut a little by around 4 to 5 dB at 300 hertz, as well as cutting a little by 3 dB at 600 hertz, and automatically the snare drum has opened up and sounds so much clearer. The easiest tweak in the world. No fancy plugin required. I'm just using a stock EQ plugin within my DAW. It doesn't matter what DAW you're using. And I just want to mention this. If you follow other pro mixers on YouTube, you'll notice some people are into boosting frequencies and some people are into cutting frequencies. The good news is that the result is going to end up being the same. For example, there are people that like to go crazy boosting top end and low end on their snare drum, as an example. Well, guess what? By boosting your top end and low end, in a sense, you are cutting your mid-range in a way, much like I've done here. Again, my personal preference is to cut frequencies that I don't really want as much of. I tend to favor that over boosting, but I boost as well. If something needs a little more top end, I'll boost it, or a little more bottom end. But the overarching idea is that I'm adding excitement to the snare by reducing the frequencies that I don't want to hear as much. And in this case, it is the lower mid frequencies, which tend to build up in raw files and raw tracks. Even when people download my multi-tracks and send me their mixes, there's so much lower mid buildup because I'm guessing, people are just scared to adjust the mid-range, and it's not necessary. Either cut that mid-range or boost that top end and low end, and you will be very, very happy. Don't overthink it. Okay, problem area number 3, and this is another big one, and it is drum overheads. Okay, if you're mixing rock and metal, take the idea that your overheads are gonna magically blend your kit together, just throw it out the window. That ain't gonna happen. Once in a blue moon, if it's the right temperature outside and it's the right, time of year, and if you're extremely lucky and you're recording an amazing drummer and everything's perfect in a room, yeah, maybe your overheads, you can get some snare out of your overheads. But that tends to not be the case for harder genres of music. For me, my overhead tracks are cymbal microphones. And I know I'm not alone in this. It's very common in modern production. So with that being said, let's listen to the overheads. I'm actually gonna do this in solo so you can hear what I mean. Check this out. You hear a ton of snare, you hear a ton of low end. Well, guess what? We don't need that. If you actually have those tracks in context, check it out. It's not bad, but the cymbals are lacking clarity. The way to fix that, very simple. Roll off all of the deep subs. I even roll off all the way up to like 700 hertz on overheads. And then the harsher frequencies in the upper mid-range, I tend to cut as well. So in this case, I'm cutting around 1K and around 3K. And then you end up with cymbal tracks that sound more like this in solo. Now, yes, of course, the overheads sound thin on their own, but in context of the rest of the kit, because I'm using room microphones and close mics on everything else, it sounds like this. It doesn't matter if the cymbals sound thin, if the room mics are filling in the rest of the frequencies, and of course, if the kick drum mic and the snare drum mic and the toms and everything else are taking care of the low end and mid range and even a little bit of the top end. The cymbals are focused where they should be, in the high end and upper mids. So as you can see, these 3 corrections and adjustments were so easy. It didn't require some fancy gimmicky plugin. It's just solid, old school mixing techniques that they've been using for decades upon decades in the studio. It's just so many of us get caught up, I think, in the complicated things or gear. It's stuff that just really doesn't matter at the end of the day, and it could be holding your productions back. Now, I don't want this for you. I want you producing better results with the gear you're currently using. It's so much of good results and pro results comes from a mindset shift and knowledge. Now, because of this right now, I'm giving you direct access for absolutely free to my exclusive training 4 dead simple ways to massively improve your recordings and mixes. In this free training, you'll learn my #1 technique for prepping heavy guitar tracks that virtually mix themselves. You'll also learn how to create instantaneous clarity within your mix using any old stock EQ plugin. Finally, learn how to take control over the levels in your mix so that instruments stop fighting with one another. And then finally, you'll learn how to craft radio-ready vocals from absolute scratch using only stock plugins. Now, full disclosure, if you're one of these people that's constantly like scrolling through TikTok and you have an attention span of a squirrel, do yourself a favor and don't even bother watching the free training. The training is almost an hour long, it's extremely in-depth, and it's meant for people like me who are really serious about audio production. Now, if you are serious about producing pro results and you're interested in audio production, the training is absolutely free right now, and you can have direct access by clicking the link below in this video's description. So I'm very curious to know, are you guilty of not manipulating your mid-range in the way that I've described in this video? Are you making these mistakes? Don't be shy. I used to make these mistakes. Leave a comment below in this video's description. I'd love to hear what you've been up to in your home studio. And again, if you like the song that you heard in this tutorial, I highly recommend checking out the band Poeta. They're a great band. There are links below to their social media in this video's description as well. And until next time, drink that spindrift.